And it was like, there's got to be more to life than this. I was feeling empty inside. I was not on a spiritual path at that point. So I didn't have that foundation that I have now. And I knew that there had to be a better way to live. I knew that I wanted to enjoy my life. I wanted to do something different, something that I felt more called to. And so I said, you know what? I think I'm going to start to explore what that might be.
Dr. Ellen Contente, I'm ecstatic for the opportunity to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come in. I was sharing with you before we hopped on the idea that you had your last name has content in it, right? And I literally I meditated a little bit before we came on board because of a crazy morning. It sounded like you had it. And content is a word that we try to shoot for a lot in the meditative practice, right? Finding content.
Absolutely. To be content with your life. And contente actually means happy. So I think there's no surprise that I found, or my purpose found me, because of my name. So I kept it through both my marriages because I love the name Contente.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, I know a guy named, his last name is Fortune, and I'm like, well, he had to be rich. There's really, you don't have very many options. I obviously love Toy Story, as you
yes.
said you yourself do, because of my last name. I didn't have much of an option either. So that's amazing. Well, outside of talking about last names today, we're going to be chatting a little bit about your expertise. And you have a litany of experiences in the world of coaching others and helping them to find a little bit less stress, a little bit more happiness in their life, and how to do that not only in their personal lives, but also in their occupations, probably at home. But I'd love to hear a little bit more sharing from you in terms of kind of how you got into this role and what you're currently doing in your space.
Absolutely. Well, I started my business about 12 years ago, Heart-Centered Programs. Yeah. And I started it because I wanted to help other people to not make the same mistakes that I had made in my life. And I had survived, and I say survived because that's what it felt like, the corporate world. And I worked in tech. I was a sales manager. I worked for an international software company. I was doing a lot of traveling. I was juggling commuting from New Jersey into Manhattan. I was also traveling around the country. And I had young twins at home. I think they were 2 or 3, 4, in that general age frame. So I literally had 2 full-time jobs, and I was not making time for myself. I had no time to make for myself. And I didn't know anything about, burnout. It was not something that was talked about. I grew up in an environment, a household, a community that taught you go to school, you get a good job, you work really hard. You become a parent and then a grandparent, and then, that's it. So, there's obviously stuff that happens in between that.
Sure.
Self-care was not anything that was talked about in my household or in the circles that I was in. It was just really work hard. And what I found was, I'd reached a point somewhere in my mid-40s. I had my kids, my twins, when I was 40. So I was a late mom, older mom. But somewhere in my mid-40s, I was recognizing that I didn't know the term burnout yet, but I was feeling it. And it was like, there's got to be more to life than this. I was feeling empty inside. I was not on a spiritual path at that point. So I didn't have that foundation that I have now. And I knew that there had to be a better way to live. I knew that I wanted to enjoy my life. I wanted to do something different, something that I felt more called to. And so I said, you know what? I think I'm going to start to explore what that might be. And ironically enough, like as the universe, when you put those intentions out, whether you clearly state them or you really think about them, things start to come, things start to happen. And I actually got laid off from that job. And we had just bought a house in New Jersey. So, of course, I was stressed beyond, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, it was probably 1,000. But it was also a great opportunity when you start looking for the silver linings or the blessings in those struggles and those challenges. At the time you couldn't see it, but looking back, it was like, that was a huge blessing because it gave my husband and I an opportunity to move to Los Angeles or move to California because he was an actor, wanted to pursue film because we had actually met on stage in New York doing theater. And, it was something he always wanted to do. And I thought, you know what? The kids are not in school yet. They were 5 years old. So it wasn't like we were pulling them out of school. I was without a job. I said, this is the perfect time for us to literally start all over again. So we sold the house. We bought a van. It took us about a year to move across country because en route, he got cast in a show in Florida. Yeah. So we ended up living in Florida for 3 months so he could do a show there. Oh. And eventually we found our way to Los Angeles, where we ended up living for 17 years. That wasn't the plan, but it put me on a completely different path. And I found a spiritual community there. I went back to school, got my master's in spiritual psychology, and then my doctorate. And then I became a minister as well as a business owner. So my area of, expertise, or what I really want to help people with today, and really what I focus on, is showing people that you don't need to be stuck in overwhelm. You don't need to be stuck feeling unhappy in your life, that we have choices. They're not always easy choices, but we do have choices. And if we're willing to take a step back and look at the big picture and really think about what is it that I really want in my life, where do I see myself in 5 years or 10 years, like that traditional interview question. Sure. But, if I'm sitting on my rocking chair and I'm looking back over my life, what do I want that picture to look like? And, what do I need to do today to make that a reality? And so, that's what I focus with people today, how to create sustainable self-care practices so that they can have the life that they want without burning out. And interestingly enough, and I'm sure you are no stranger to this, being an entrepreneur and a business person, you are more prone to burnout than working for somebody else. So it's even more important to make sure that you are putting those practices in place and that you have good, healthy boundaries. So, that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but
no, that's the exact right answer. You're the one who can tell it better than anyone else. And I think you have such a unique background that I think aligns so well with what we talk about here on this show, because a lot of times, I share with you, just like I share with anybody who I'm interested in having on the show, the qualifications for the type of person that fits well in this space. And one of those is that they're an expert in a field that they coach other people in directly. And the other is that they recognize that it's not just one dimension that matters. All of these different things matter. And so you find yourself in this unique juxtaposition of spiritual wellness with emotional wellness, which I think is so phenomenal, but also plays such a strong role in our well-being and how to manage our emotions. Because when you have a spiritual backing, and spirituality means a lot of things to a lot of different people, so I'm generalizing here, but when you have a spiritual backing, you are recognizing that there's something bigger than yourself that you're serving or that you're helping or that you're aligning your life with, whether that's a deity or that's karma or whatever it happens to be. And so the ability to let go a little bit of what you think is drastic in your life, or letting go of some of these stressors in your life and recognizing there's a bigger thing happening here, can be very powerful for your emotional well-being. So that's how they kind of interplay. Is that something that you have found as well in your work with your life?
And I think, what I have found is that there's a huge connection and interplay between mind, body, and soul. And so when we talk about emotions, right, we're talking about, that the feelings that we have that come from what we're thinking about. So when I talk to people about stress, and people say, I'm really stressed because I've got so much on my plate, or I'm stressed because of work, or I'm stressed because of that. And then I ask them, well, here's a great example, like traffic. I used to be completely stressed out about traffic. Living in Los Angeles, it would take you 2 hours to go 5 miles sometimes. Right? But what I realized was it wasn't the traffic that was stressing me. It was, what was I thinking about? Like, oh my God, I'm going to be late for that appointment, or what's that client going to think of me because I show up late, or, And it's what am I thinking about the events, the circumstances, the situations, because that's what's creating the stress that I'm feeling. Right? So when we start looking at, the mind is creating a thought, that thought is creating a feeling, that feeling is then creating a behavior. And if I'm not getting the results that I want, if I just change my thought, I can change the whole cycle. And so mind, body, soul is all connected. And so going back to your comment about the spirituality piece, it's like, for me, it's not just recognizing like a deity, because it's or something that we serve. It's recognizing that this power that, has created everything, I am that. I possess that. I'm a divine expression of that. So if that is who I am, because we're talking about who am I,
sure.
If that is who I am, then I have this power within me to make those changes. And if I can recognize the power of changing my thoughts in my life can impact how I feel, can impact, the stress response, because, there is that physiological response that happens when we're thinking about things that stress us out. And that, like, on your continuum, talking about, from sickness to fitness and working towards, peak fitness with people, it's getting them to see the signs and the symptoms really early on so they can halt, right? And make those changes so that they don't slip back, right? So that they can see, there's that connection between those thoughts that I was having and what I was experiencing physically, emotionally, mentally. So,
yeah. That's phenomenal. You brought up such a multitude of great points. I think one of the first ones that popped up was I just recently had an interview with Ankur Kalra, who it hasn't come out yet. It will before this one. He's an interventional cardiologist. And we had the exact same conversation, but for physical wellness. How do we recognize the symptoms way before we have the heart attack?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Most people, unfortunately, and this is almost just true of how life is we wait until there's a problem before we come up with a solution, which logically makes sense to a degree. But the problem is we were gifted with very powerful brains, and we have the capacity to see how trends are working and how things are happening. And that is also our downfall, because more of us should be spending more time in the present than in the future. And anxiety really only comes from worrying about something that may or may not happen.
Right.
But we have the capacity to see these trends occur. And so asking ourselves, how do we figure out what trend we're on? That's a big thing you mentioned with the continuum. It's really about trends. Okay, my bank account is still in the green, so I'm good to go. Yes, but are you spending more than you're getting? And if you are, then that trend's not going to go well.
Yeah.
With Encore, it was about plaque buildup in our heart. But what I'm hearing from you is it's the burnout and the stress, and how do we recognize these signs and symptoms earlier on?
I like to use an analogy with my clients, because I think the traffic, being, driving, I haven't met anybody yet that hasn't driven. And I lived in New York City, and a lot of people own cars, including myself. So most everybody can relate to this one. So we have such busy lives. And so when we're driving, we just want to get that green light, because we've got to get where we've got to go. So, green, 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 go, go, go. But yet up ahead, we see the light is flashing yellow, right? That's a warning sign telling us, hey, be prepared to stop. Because we know if we do not stop and the light turns red, it can be catastrophic. And in our bodies, in our minds, our hearts, our souls, our physical bodies, there are yellow flashing lights going off all the time. If we're paying attention, we can actually stop when, before that light turns red, and get back into a green state, right? Or a calmer state, or a less stressed state. So when you start, recognizing, I haven't been sleeping well, or I've been really irritable, I've been snapping at my loved ones, I can't focus anymore, or I'm just feeling this languishing feeling, right? Maybe there's no illness, but I'm not flourishing, I'm not happy. And unfortunately, we live in a society, as you were just saying, that we focus more on sickness. And then what do we do if we're sick to get well again? Versus recognizing, that wellness. And I love that definition, that conscious, deliberate process right? What is it? What does wellness mean to me? All those dimensions of my life. So I don't have to be sick. I mean, the opposite of sick isn't necessarily well. And I think that's a really key thing for people to recognize is I don't have to have a diagnosis from a doctor to be sick. There's many other ways to look at how well am I in my life. So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that definition comes from Peggy Swarbrick, a phenomenal woman from Rutgers who created the 8 dimensions of wellness. Wonderful person. And, you bring up a really good point of this idea of kind of recognizing these signs within our body. I recently had a conversation with a client who, mentioned that they can sometimes get angry. And that was one of the things that we were kind of working on is how do we communicate more effectively? And they had heard that anger was a weakness. If you're getting angry, that means that you're not in control of your emotions and you should be able to handle that better. And so my conversation with them is, emotions will happen. You cannot control an emotion. It's a physiological response to an external factor. So you almost get hit by a bus. I'm sorry, but you're probably going to get scared and then you're going to get mad. And so the emotions aren't a weakness. It's a question of, okay, now what's the feeling that's coming with that? What are you saying? What story are you telling about the bus driver who almost hit you or the car that cut you off or the coworker who didn't pull their load? What's the stories that you're telling? And that's kind of the feelings that you're generating based off of that. Even those are often pretty quick in response. You almost have an immediate reaction to those things because you've done it so many times, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Because there is that pattern that happens, especially when we, let's say anger is that pattern response that we have. But, and I think it's unfortunate that people are told or brought up to believe that it's not okay to be angry. Because truthfully, anger is it's an emotion that's informing you that something is wrong, something's, from your value perspective is wrong. And it's what am I going to do with that anger? That's really the key more than anything else. So, yeah. That conversation ended with talking about how do you respond, right? And those are the two questions you ask. Or do you react or do you respond? A reaction is probably not what we're shooting for. And so just, I mentioned to them, one of the goals I have with my clients who have issues with that is to separate the issue from the response. Give yourself a little bit of time. Type the email and then save it till tomorrow. Those types of things, right? Yeah. And make sure you do not put the person who you're sending it to until 24 hours later, just in case you hit send by accident. Yes, exactly. So I learned that one in a communication class. I thought that was brilliant. I love that. But what you're sharing, Woody, is, that space in between, right? The stimulus and response. One of the tools that was shared with me many years ago, and I don't know who first created it, but it's the word stop. And I use it with every one of my clients on everything, because when you're triggered, right? You're angry, you're upset, and you need to hit the pause so that you don't do or say something, or you want to reset your emotional state. Again, visualize a stoplight, right? That's the S, stop. The T is take the break or take a breath. And literally in that moment, you can just take a nice, long, slow, deep breath. Sometimes you have to take 10. But the O can be used in a couple different ways. So you could use it from a mindfulness perspective and just observe what's going on in your physical body. Like just observe my heart is racing. I could even just observe that I'm having a stressful or angry thought. So I'm moving into like a neutral observer position. And it's also about owning the outcome that you want. So if you're using this professionally, like, okay, what's the outcome that I want? I don't want to do or say something that, it's going to get me fired, right? So I want to be able to respond to this professionally. And then the P is the pause that I'm taking until I feel more calm, and then I proceed. So that's it, because you can't go until the light turns green. So with using stop as the tool, that's exactly how I'm going to use it. I'm just going to keep breathing. I'm going to focus on what I want to happen here. And then when I feel more centered and calm, then I proceed. So I also love how many analogies you have related to traffic, given that you lived
in LA and New York both. I wonder if there's a correlation there.
There probably is. You could probably see what my number one stressor was.
And I hear you. And isn't it ironic? And then I want to get into some of the questions that we posed today, but isn't it ironic that we spend so much time wishing we had more time to slow down and relax, and then when a yellow light hits, you speed up to try to break it because you're like, I don't want to sit in my car for 2 minutes. I want to sit somewhere else for 2 minutes and relax. But what really will happen is you'll get to wherever you're going, and then you'll sit there and be stressed out about something else. And so it's recognizing, like, just in the moment, like, can we be here for a second and relax?
Right, exactly.
That's funny. So we're talking a little bit about, we have a lot of different options here in terms of what you work in terms of wellness, and in the emotional capacity, in the spiritual capacity, physical. I've even mentioned social to you as well. But I want to hear a little bit more about kind of what dimension that you want to touch on. And then I want to hear how you might describe wellness in that dimension to, I always use the middle schooler analogy. How would you describe wellness to them?
That's, I thought about that, and I thought that was a great way to, be able to articulate really what it is that you do when you help people. And, as we were talking about, wellness, when I ask people, well, what does well-being mean to you? I get a lot of different responses. And so I don't think it's really for me to define for somebody else what wellness is for them, because, some people are more focused in one dimension than others, even though there's definitely correlation. I mean, if my financial piece is out of whack, then so is my emotional piece. If my physical piece is out of whack, more than likely many other dimensions are out of whack. So I would say wellness is about creating and living a life that is consistent with your values, with your goals, with your dreams. And it provides, I think, the balance that you're looking for in your life to do the things that you want to do. So, work, family, friends, community, spiritual, financial, all the different pieces. What's the magic number in each one of those dimensions that's important to you? It's not about balance in all of them in terms of having the equal amount of time invested in all those dimensions. It's about, what stage am I in my life? What are my priorities? And am I spending my time in doing those things that are important to me today? Tomorrow might be different, but right now, this is what I want my life to look like. To me, that's what wellness is.
That's great. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that idea of everything doesn't have to be in balance. And by that, and I would say it in a different way, because you said you're not going to invest the same amount of time in everything. And that's what people think balance is they think, I'm going to spend an hour in each one of these things every day. Well, no, you're not, not successfully, not right. and win in life. What I do with my clients is I actually have a survey that I've generated that helps kind of give them an idea of where they stand. And it's, it's a ballpark. Everybody's different. One survey is not going to appreciate and respect the individuality of every human, but it gives us an idea of where to start. And almost always what we'll find is everybody's good, probably 6 of them. Right. Or maybe even 4 or 5. They're great, and maybe one of them, i.e. occupational, I'm crushing it, or financial, I'm crushing it. And then there's 2 of them, they're like, man, I really wish I could be doing better here. And so it's recognizing in a lot of those, the goal is, can I get to a place where this manages itself pretty well? I don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time handling this, but it's something I need to keep in mind, right? Social connections is a big one right now. People are like, I'm so busy to go out with my friends and enjoy time. It's like, well, we're going to see what happens at the end of your life when you're like, I was too busy to make connections with other humans, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, it's, I don't need to divest into all of them all at once, but maybe there's 1 or 2 that are a little lower than I'd like them to be. And that's maybe where some of my energy goes.
Absolutely. And that's the key. What you just said is that, when I work with people similar to what you do, right, we look at all these different dimensions, right? It's called, in stress, it's that life cycle. It's the life wheel, and it's all these different dimensions that might be contributing to your stress level. And, when you start looking at all the different dimensions, again, like you said, some might be great. I've got this covered. I'm doing well over here, but this area is not good. So that's where we start with the lowest number. And that number could be, just how I'm feeling about it emotionally. It could be an assessment that we do to see, where you are on a stress scale, where you are on a burnout scale. The number one thing that I work with people on is, no matter what dimension we start in, is creating sustainable habits. Because anyone can go on a diet and lose weight, right? Anyone can put their budget together and do really well and save money for something. But if it's not sustainable, it's just going to fall off, and then we're right back where we started from. So it's got to be something that you can, we start small, we start slow, we get into the habit of doing something different than you were doing before. And if you can sustain it and it gets the results that you want, you don't have to think about it. It just becomes it goes on autopilot. So that's the key.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge aspect of it, is when it becomes a habit and you can invest a small bit. And that's really what sustainability in my mind is, you think about compound interest, investing early in your life so you don't have to work the rest of your life. It's the ability to invest a little bit every single day instead of having to do a huge amount all at once, like a huge diet or a huge lump sum or a complete change in my lifestyle.